From the opening of a mega port to investments in sustainable development and digital technologies, we'll discuss China's growing trade relationship in Latin America. Hello, I'm Arun Naidu, and this is The Heat. The Chinese President Xi Jinping is on his way to Lima, Peru, to attend the 2024 APEC Leaders Meeting. President Xi is expected to deliver a speech on China's deepening reforms and opening up, and discuss ways to advance Asia-Pacific cooperation. The Chinese president will also join Peruvian President Dina Boluarte for a state visit and will inaugurate the Shanghai megaport. In the first 10 months of 2024, China's trade with other APEC economies reached a historic high at over $2 trillion. My colleague Sean Caleb spoke with Tengku Zafrul Aziz, the Malaysian Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry. He started by asking him about this year's theme at APEC, Empower, Include, Grow.
Well, I think the theme is very relevant to what's happening globally today, and definitely relevant to Malaysia as well. If you look at the member economies of APEC, the 21 member economies, we are all going through a period of uncertainty in a way, economically. We've seen the two economic superpowers having challenges as well, and this will impact economic cooperation, economic integration, because to me it's important that we have a platform like this, APEC, where we can discuss issues and challenges that are faced. If you look at APEC, population, member economies, the population is about 3 billion. That's close to 30% of the population. And GDP-wise, close to 60%, and it's nearly 50% of global trade. So it is a really important part of the global economy, and you have major economies there as well. So for us, what we want to see, if it's a small country, Malaysia, is a trading nation, we want to see economies being more integrated, because we feel that with integration, they'll be more inclusive. Because we want to see that growth globally for many countries, especially less developed and developing countries, has to be a growth that is inclusive, growth that is sustainable as well and resilient. And therefore, we must make sure that the growth is also equitable. And this can only be achieved if the economies are more integrated. That's our view. And next year, Malaysia will be the chair of ASEAN as well. So
January 1st.
January the 1st. So we are also is also in line, actually, the theme of APEC this year is also in line with the theme of ASEAN when we take over the chairmanship next year.
Yeah, pick up on that. Talk about how important that's going to be, because you said that Malaysia is a small country. It's going to have a very big position, and how ASEAN, you think, is going to tie in to all the strides that people make here at the APEC meetings, because if there's one thing, it's all about inclusiveness. It's not about one country saying, we're doing this.
Yes. Yeah, so for ASEAN, I mean, if you look at ASEAN as a group, if we have 6 countries here, ASEAN nations who are also member economies of APEC. You have Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam, right? And at the same time, if you look at ASEAN, the entire bloc, economic bloc, the GDP is $3.8 trillion. That's the 5th largest economic bloc. But the population is 680 million people, and it's growing at 4 to 5%. Therefore, if you look at that trajectory, we will achieve a position of 4th largest economic bloc in the world by the year 2030. But again, even within ASEAN, we want to see more integration. If you look at trade within ASEAN, it's less than 25% among ASEAN countries. Really? Yeah. So of course we have major trading partners: America, United States, and China. Right? These are all the 2 largest trading partners for all ASEAN countries and for ASEAN itself. Similarly, for APEC, we want to see more as well, because you need to integrate to make sure that the growth is inclusive. And when you talk about inclusive growth, it's not only about growth that is enjoyed by large companies, large multinationals. It has to be equitable, right? Where we need to get involvement of small, medium enterprises, involvement of the youth, involvement of the women enterprises as well, because this is where, again, in the APEC, this year, we will be discussing about ensuring that we have the digital platform, we have to have the green platform, because we want to have market access as well for all segments of businesses as well.
If I'm not mistaken, just a couple of years ago, you said that APEC nations contribute about 75% of the economy, of your economy. Pick up on what you were talking about, getting this inclusiveness. What kind of small and medium businesses, what kind of entities could more involve women? How could this move forward and really benefit your country?
Yeah. You're right. Malaysia is about actually in last year's number 2023 is close to 80%, 79% of our trade is with the APEC member economies. And if you look at where it is, what makes up an economy? For Malaysia, 70% of the working population are employed by the small and medium enterprises. It includes women entrepreneurs, includes micro SMEs as well. So they, in terms of social aspects of the economic social aspects as well, it's important that we integrate them, because it gives employment. It is 99% of companies registered in Malaysia and 90% registered in Southeast Asia are companies that are SMEs. So we can't let growth not involve this group, right? So and how do we do that? So I think for ASEAN, we hope that next year when we chair ASEAN, we will conclude the Digital Economic Framework Agreement, where we have e-commerce as one platform, where we try and streamline the guidelines, the policies, the laws, so enable small companies to participate, all the way through payments, etc. Right. So this is also similar for APEC economies. We need to make sure that even the urban and non-urban as well is integrated in terms of access to markets. And I think it's important that this is being discussed because we are always talking about growth with large countries versus smaller countries with more developed versus less developed. But at the same time, we also need to look at the growth in country, growth within region, between big companies and small companies, as well as other enterprises like social enterprises, women enterprises, etc.
Well, picking up that, let's talk about other trade agreements that are going on that affects the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, as well as the Free Trade Area of Asia Pacific. What is Malaysia's position on these agreements, and how do you believe it's benefiting?
Well, we believe in multilateral agreements and bilateral agreements when it comes to trade. We believe that multilateral organization and WTO plays an important role. For Malaysia itself, as I mentioned just now, we're a very open economy. We have a trading nation. If we look at trade to GDP, it's about 130%. And we are signatories to 16 FTAs, both bilateral and multilateral. And you mentioned one of them, RCEP, and the other one actually is CPTPP. These are the two big FTAs that we are part of. And of course, we are part of APEC, and we are a supporter and proponents of FTAP as well. Right? We want to see that happen. Because we feel that there are merits to that, but of course there are challenges. If you look at the member economies of APEC, it's not so easy to achieve that. But Malaysia will continue to engage. We are also engaging the various other platforms, IPECs. We've just been accepted as partner in BRICS, we will continue. And then concluded, we also just started to resume negotiations with EU. So for us, we see the benefits of these multilateral agreements, especially concerning free trade.
You talked about the CEO Summit. Talk a bit about how important that is along with the APEC meetings, how that really works hand in hand, perhaps better than any other kind of economic platform out there.
Yeah. Well, I think APEC, when you look at engagement and how the CEO Summit is integrated into the APEC Leaders Meeting, it's a good template to have for other events, like even ASEAN, etc. I think this is good. In fact, our Prime Minister and other leaders will be involved in many discussions. They are also even speaking at APEC CEO Summit. They have also a private session with the CEOs 2 or 3 times, different groups, and all leaders are also expected to participate in these discussions. And this is an opportunity for both sides, right? The policymakers as well as the industry leaders to, I guess, relay concerns and challenges, and also, of course, there are positives as well on the economy.
Build bridges.
Build bridges, yeah. I mean, it's time to build bridges here, and to get policymakers to also appreciate the challenges, the concerns, and because all these decisions will have an impact, not just on the companies, but also on the people, on the economies, because there are spillover effects of investments and trade to economies.
The Shanghai Import-Export Expo
Yes.
just ended, 7th year, and the 7th year you were there. Talk about that. How important is that, and have you seen it grow, especially post-pandemic?
Yeah, the CIIE is very good. We were there in Shanghai. Our Prime Minister was there. We were given the honor to be the guest of honor, country of honor for that. You're right, 7 years in a row we participate, and China has been an important part of our global economy, especially ASEAN as well. In fact, for Malaysia, China has been Malaysia's largest trading partner for 15 consecutive years. And therefore, you know, the CIIE plays an important role, and because that market, China is a big market for our companies to access. We need to continue to engage and see how Malaysian companies can be more involved in that supply chain to China. And I think we've announced that, you know, our trade numbers are continue to going up, and Shanghai is one of those platforms. CIIE is one of that platform. It's important that the G2G relationship gives confidence as well for the B2B to come in.
You know, you've talked about trade and growing and the positive steps. I'm curious what you think about the port that is going to open here, what that is going to do, because it's going to shave as much as 12 days off of shipping stuff out of South America to Asia. How does Malaysia figure into this, and are you excited about watching this massive venue open?
Yes, I mean, of course, it's a big major investment by China company. We discussed this yesterday, actually, here, because we have one of our CEO of the largest port in Malaysia is also here, present here today, and he briefed us about that positive prospects and how we also, I mean, Malaysia can benefit from this. In fact, he was saying that if there's opportunity, Malaysia would also like to participate here in Peru in the port activities. So I think that's positive. For at the end of the day, again, you know, back to my earlier point, this will drive down costs, and I think the one that will benefit at the end of the day is the consumers.
That was my colleague Sean Caleb's talking with the Malaysian Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry. Well, the newly elected Indonesia President Prabowo Subianto met with Chinese President Xi Jinping for a state visit in Beijing before traveling to Peru. The two countries signed a series of trade agreements on infrastructure, green energy and digital technology. Joining us now from California is Gita Wirjawan. He's a former Indonesian Trade Minister and currently a visiting scholar at the Precourt Institute of Energy at Stanford University. Gita, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with that visit by President Subianto to China, to Beijing. He met with President Xi Jinping, as I said. That was before the APEC meetings. They signed deals worth $10 billion, and they agreed to greater cooperation in new energy vehicles, lithium batteries, as well as the digital economy. What were your main takeaways from that visit by the Indonesian president?
I think it's a continuation of the very robust economic and other types of relations between the two countries, but also it's a breath of fresh air. I think it's safe to assume that if there's any intersection between Indonesia or Southeast Asia with the rest of the world, particularly the superpowers, i.e. China and or the US, it would boil down to energy transition and also AI. And the fact that a number of the memoranda that would have been signed in Beijing would have involved the digital space and also the energy transition space. I think that's a breath of fresh air at the rate that, you know, we are witnessing the changing of climate in a much more accelerated manner. And, you know, I'm hopeful that, you know, some of these, if not all of these memoranda would very quickly translate into actionability.
Now, President Subianto says he wants to overhaul Indonesia's economic system. He wants to boost growth from 5% to 8%. What are the prospects of him achieving that?
Well, I don't think that's going to be instantaneous, but I do believe that it's not an impossibility. If you take into account just how Indonesia has been performing so far, it would have been within the 4.5 to 5% range. On the back of Indonesia's ability only to attract about $25 to $30 billion worth of FDI on a yearly basis. Now, in the context of a $1.4 trillion economy, that delta of 3% that's needed to get it up to 8% is really, just about $40 billion worth of FDI. So if we can move the needle from $30 billion of FDI to, let's say, $70 billion every year, it is achievable. But to get there, I think there's a few things that need to be done. And I want to put this in the context of how FDI has been coming to Southeast Asia at an amount of about $200 billion into Southeast Asia, which Singapore has been getting about $100 to $140 billion. So moving the needle from $30 billion to $70 billion for a country that's larger than Singapore mathematically doesn't seem impossible. But I think we need to work on certain things, particularly the rule of law, which I think has been a very important element for attracting financial or capital formation from different parts of the world.
And when President Subianto talks about changing the economic system, is he talking about changing the sort of changing away from the traditional industries like mining that Indonesia's been involved in, more towards technology and digital technologies?
I don't think it's a shift. I think there is likely to be a continuing inertia from the pre-existing, call it pistons of the economy. But he is, I think, contemplating embellishing it by way of allowing, for Indonesia and the Indonesians to be able to move up the value chain. And this will involve, I think, a much higher degree of downstreaming of pre-existing extractive industries, but also, as you aptly pointed out, I think it would mean the embracing of the new economies in a much bigger way.
Now, Indonesia is the world's biggest producer of nickel. That's a critical component in the manufacture of batteries for electric vehicles. China is the biggest importer of Indonesia's nickel. It imported nearly 4 million tons in 2023, but environmentalists have pointed out that this comes at a cost to the country's ecosystems, to its environment as well. Can Indonesia continue on this path while moving towards a more sustainable mining industry?
I think it can. There are studies and scientific studies that have increasingly been able to show that there is a way to, promote and advance nickel in a more environmentally friendly manner. And this is where I think countries like China and the United States could play a role. If you charge your BYD in Beijing, you'll get charged about 5 cents on a per kilowatt hour basis, as compared to charging your Tesla in California at about 47 to 57 cents on a per kilowatt hour basis. And this, I think, tells the world, at least me, that China, as a developed economy, is able to think like a developing economy by charging its people at a much more affordable level. And this is where I think China could be value additive in, getting Indonesia to transition into a much more environmentally friendly manner on the back of new findings of taking nickel to a much more sustainable, level. And this could take time, but I'm quite optimistic in the sense that nickel is something that could be done in a much more environmentally friendly manner, at least in the medium term.
Right now, one of the big challenges for leaders around the world is the impact of climate change. Of course, Indonesia is no exception to this. Indonesia has been vulnerable to floods, droughts, changes in rainfall patterns as well. That's wreaked havoc in many places. So how would you see the country's transition to the use of more green technologies, and also in terms of how much money is being invested in this sector?
It really boils down to two things, right? The first is really with respect to the power generation capabilities, which have to transition into a much more environmentally friendly manner, call that renewables. The second is really with respect to circularities. Now, on the first, the amount that's needed for Indonesia to become modern, we're talking about basically building an additional 400,000 megawatts worth of power generation capabilities. Now, to the extent that we want to do that on a sustainable basis, it's going to require massive amounts of capital, approximately $1 trillion. Indonesia needs to be very cognizant of what needs to get done to get that sort of an amount, and only big countries are in position to allocate that sort of an amount, i.e. around $1 trillion. Also coupled with their technological wherewithal to make sure that the new build out is done on a sustainable and renewable basis. Secondly, with respect to the circularities, I think there's a lot of work that's being done to make sure that Indonesia participates in a good way within this climate space, whether it is relevant to reforestation of pre-existing forests, but also reforestation and the augmentation of the pre-existing mangrove forest. And from a lifestyle standpoint, in terms of making sure that the public, would, show a lot more, friendliness to the planet. But I do believe out of these two things that are relevant to climate change, the first is really the much bigger concern that needs to be resolved. And I'm a believer that I think China could play a much more proactive role in the energy transition thesis of countries like Indonesia, not only from a technological, capital allocation standpoint, but also from a financial capital allocation standpoint.
Right. Now, you also play a key role in making people aware of Indonesia, what goes on there, what its challenges are, where it's going to. You are the creator and host of a podcast known as Endgame. What do you hope people who subscribe to Endgame will learn about Indonesia and about Southeast Asia?
Well, it's really a mission that some of us have embraced, as to educate the world about Southeast Asia and educate Southeast Asia about what's going on in the world. Our topics basically span from anything relevant to neuroscience, data science, geopolitics, entrepreneurship, peace, and all that. And I do believe that Southeast Asia, a region of around 700 million people, $3.8 trillion economy, is one of the most under-narrated regions in the world. And it's shocking that many people in Palo Alto don't even know where Southeast Asia is. And I do believe this podcast, is on a mission to bring about more relevance to Southeast Asia, to the rest of the world. And we seem to be tracking, in a good way.
Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Okay, now for more on the APEC Leaders Meeting, we're joined by Andy Mok. He's a Senior Research Fellow with the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. Andy, great to see you. President Xi is on his way to Lima in Peru for the APEC meetings. He's expected to address delegates there. He's expected to talk about deepening China's reforms back home and advancing Asia-Pacific cooperation as well. What are your expectations?
Well, I think this is a very important time for APEC, Anand. And I think we can expect much deeper China-Latin America cooperation. And I think this has the potential to open a new chapter in the development of Latin America. And I want to share a short quote from Pablo Neruda, who is a Chilean poet and Nobel laureate. So he wrote that Latin America is very fond of the word hope. We like to be called the continent of hope. This hope is like a promise of heaven, an IOU whose payment is always put off until next year, until next century. So one of the important milestones I think we will see in Lima is the Shanghai Port opening, which of course China is playing a pivotal role. And why does this matter so much, Anand? When we look at the legacy of development in Latin America, it is really the legacy of colonialism, where development occurred on the coastal regions, so gold, silver, other natural resources could be exported to the old world. And what this meant was there is a tremendous lack of regional integration in terms of infrastructure. So we've heard a lot about the Shanghai Port shortening shipment times from that part of the world to Asia. But I think we also need to recognize that this is also, I believe, the beginning, and we've seen this with railways as well in South America, where China's taking a part, but that this really could open a new era of hope, where the hope is not in IOUs, but intangible infrastructure development that will unlock the potential of this region.
Andy, one other point, and that is, how will the opening of the Shanghai port, I mean, it's not just going to service Peru, it's going to service the whole of the Latin American continent. How will that change the landscape of international trade from, what have been traditional sort of trading parts which we have seen for the past 50, 60 years?
Absolutely, Anand. So I think, first of all, this will have a very big positive impact for Peru. So Peru, third largest country in Latin America, per capita GDP of about $8,000 US. I think this will be an enormous boost to the local economy, which of course will have spillover effects to the larger region. But for the region overall, again, I think the story is regional integration, and this will unlock a lot of the latent potential that hold back. Also by historical political reasons from the U.S. as well. We mustn't forget the resentment that's felt in this part of the world by U.S. interventions in Guatemala, Chile, et cetera, that China is pushing on an open door here. And I think, again, this will be very, very positive for regional development.
Okay, Andy, thanks so much for being with us. We have to leave it there. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.